I would like a United States of Europe. I would like to dispense with all the national governments, all of them, and replace it with one government for the whole of the European Union.
Okay.
When you look at the EU, yes, it has issues. Yes, it was created in the 50s with certain systems and reformed in the 80s with the Single European Act. But it's nowhere near where it needs to be.
Okay.
Size-wise, powers-wise, gradually as more and more chapters come in, they will have to reform it because they won't be able to do it the old way. The national parliaments will disappear. The national prime ministers will disappear. And slowly, you'll elect it directly to the EU's government.
NordVPN is becoming more than just a VPN. Threat protection will guard your device against malicious websites, malware, trackers, and intrusive ads, even if you're not connected to a VPN server at the time. Step up your cybersecurity and stay safe.
There is a growing discourse within the UK for Britain to rejoin the EU. In this video, I'm going to be talking to somebody who is a member of one of the parties that wants Britain to rejoin the EU. So we're going to be finding out about why, and I'm going to be asking them questions that I have as someone who voted Brexit. Hi everybody, this is Crypto Rich, working with you to get rich with crypto, filling our pockets with crypto profits. Although this one isn't about crypto, this one is about politics, because I also cover that on my channel. I also cover health issues and COVID-related issues, and you can find all my videos on bit.ly/CryptoRichOdyssey, bit.ly/CryptoRichOdyssey, including all the videos that are too sensitive and touchy for YouTube, and I get shadow banned and censored there. Please also follow me on my Twitter, CryptoRichYT, and join my Telegram announcements channel. I'll have the link in the description below. John, thank you so much for making yourself available. Really appreciate it.
No problem at all.
Yeah, you are the deputy leader for ReJoin EU. And that's
I'm the Northern England coordinator for ReJoin EU. I think they may have got the title slightly wrong.
Right. Or they've got big plans for you.
Well, yes, possibly, but we're only very small, so there's room for improvement.
Okay. Now, what's the website address if anybody wants to go and find out?
You want to look for the ReJoin EU Party. That's what you want to search for.
The ReJoin EU
Party. Make sure you put party on, otherwise there's another group called ReJoin EU.
Okay, the ReJoin EU Party. Okay.
Well, no, just party. Just search for that.
Okay,
ReJoin EU Party.
Great. I'll have the links in the description below. All right, so you're the Northern Coordinator. And when did the party start? Because I only...
about 3-4 years ago.
Oh.
I've only been with them, about 6 months now.
Right. Okay. So they started about 3-4 years ago. Now, we had the Brexit referendum in 2016, and I forgot the date that we actually left.
That was end of 2019, early 2020, that sort of thing. Somewhere around there when they were still arguing about it. That's when Johnson got in, and then it was the Christmas afterwards, wasn't it, approximately, when we actually supposedly left.
Yes. And then currently, right now, as we're recording this on Friday, what day is it, the 24th of February?
Yes.
Yeah.
The day of the invasion of Ukraine.
They are discussing the Northern Ireland Protocol and what we're going to do about that. Okay. So tell us a bit about the ReJoin EU, what it stands for, why.
Yeah. Okay, ReJoin EU Party was created for a very simple reason. None of the other parties are standing up for it. Labour used to, officially, even though Corbyn was a Brexiter, everybody knows. He also delayed stuff and made it impossible for Labour and Remain to actually function properly. The Lib Dems were very, very much ReJoin under Joe Swinson, and then Ed Davey took over and basically betrayed ReJoin. It's very clear. I left them, and I made it very clear to Mark Pack and Ed Davey in email as a reasonably influential member within the Bolton branch. My thoughts about it: they put a motion through for conference. All the local parties agreed it. It then came to conference, and Ed Davey changed it at the last minute, right? Which because we were going for ReJoin, and then it's turned into ReJoin eventually. When eventually people have decided that they might want to do that, and all the tralala down the line.
Okay.
So I basically left them at that stage. Now, I've been hunting for a party that followed the right direction for me. I was green for a while, and they're sort of moving in that direction. But the ReJoin EU Party does what it says on the tin. It has one policy: ReJoin EU. That's it. That's our official policy. Okay? The other things
nothing
are down
evasive.
to the individual candidates.
Right.
They get to decide their own policy. We're not a dictatorship. Unlike the other parties, we don't actually tell them this is what you will do, what you will say. No. One box, rejoin EU by whatever means.
Right. Okay.
Obviously, we don't touch fascism and things like that, and racism. There's obviously exclusion at that stage, but
Yes,
apart from that, it's very, very, very simple. We want to rejoin the EU. End.
Okay. Now the Tory party are nominally for Brexit. I would say. I mean,
nominally.
Okay. Well, in my opinion, right? But whatever, right? And then the Liberal Democrats. Now, for people who don't know, because most of my viewers are from the United States, Liberal Democrats is the third party in the UK. They don't really they haven't held power because it switches between Labour and Tories, but they can wield influence within Parliament, given sufficient number of seats, and they're supposed to be between Labour and Conservative in terms of where they're positioned on the political spectrum. But I didn't know that Ed Davey had changed that. So what are they now? Are they just saying, because we've had the referendum, we just have to honour the referendum? Or what is it they're saying now?
I don't know. I don't think they know. I don't think they know. It's like Labour, it's the same thing. They keep saying, we're for Brexit, we're going to make it work. Ow.
Yeah.
When a car's lost a wheel, you don't drive it.
Right. It's so funny because for me, as someone who voted Brexit, Labour and Tory occur for me as Romain mostly, at least the current cabinet and Keir Starmer's Labour. But anyway, but it's just kind of funny. It's like you can look at something. Let me see what I got right. Let me see. Like you can look at something from this angle, and what you see is a circle. I'm looking at it from over here and say, no, this angle, mate. What are you talking about?
The fact is, they're both saying they want to implement Brexit and make Brexit work.
Right.
We want the opposite.
You don't want.
We don't want Brexit to work. We want Brexit to end. We want it reversed, destroyed, burnt, cremated, the ashes crushed and chucked in a box.
Right. Okay.
Right?
Now the question is why?
Well, I'm half English, half Norwegian, made in Italy.
Yeah.
I wanted a sort of little hook to hang things on to get people's attention. Went all the way through school in Belgium. Uni over here. I've worked for companies all over the EU. I've travelled quite widely. I am European. What you see behind me is if you chop me through the middle, that's what you'll see, like a stick of Blackpool rock. It's the only thing that fits. And Brexit took my identity. I'm not a European citizen anymore. Literally took my identity.
Okay.
Norway won't have me back because I handed my passport back when I got my British one at the age of 19. They won't have me back because I didn't do my national service. Fair enough. Belgium won't have me back. I have 16 years residence there through school. They won't have me because in 2005 they passed a law that says if it's prior to that, it doesn't count. So my 16 years residence don't count for anything. So I'm literally stuck on this muddy island.
Okay, but now that's a very personal reason. And you are a rare breed. I don't think there are many people that match that demographic. Is it half Norwegian, Italian?
People have bits of it. People have bits of it. But yes, I am quite a strong case. Yes.
Yeah. I was born in Pakistan, brought up in London. My wife is Scottish. But there aren't many of me.
But there are far more than you think. There's a lot of mixed up people.
Sure, but those personal reasons apart, I'm interested in what are the grander macro political reasons.
Macro political reasons. Well, just look at the mess. Look at the mess we're in. Right. This country has not grown since before COVID. We've not grown. We've not got it back. We're still below 2019 economic activity levels. Our currency's dropped 15% compared to the others. We're just going nowhere.
Yes,
our borders are virtually closed to goods. The reason we have no tomatoes, lettuces, cucumbers, and all the rest of it is because it's so hard to ship them here. And they will ship it to places that's easier. So if there's a shortage, the EU gets them all because it's easy to get them in. Getting them to the UK is very hard. There's no direct route, so they have to ship it through the EU. So they have to declare it in and declare it out. That's not going to work.
Okay, so it hasn't worked, you're saying, right? You're giving
those locked themselves off. The Irish now have a separate sea route. Now, if you're aware, they've got their own ferries now running from Ireland to northern France, bypassing the UK completely.
Okay.
So shipping tomatoes and vegetables and stuff to Ireland is easier than shipping them here. It's harder than into France, but it's not as hard as here.
But couldn't all those trade agreements it's possible for them all to be negotiated and worked out?
Why would they bother? We're small. We don't count. We're a piffling little economy.
Sure, it's still one of the larger economies within the European Union.
Yes, but everybody
Germany,
can count
France,
themselves
Spain,
as part of the larger, Rich. That's the thing.
Hmm.
India, China, US, EU, stop. They're the 4 big economies. The others are way down below. Way smaller.
Okay, so the arguments are economic, that Britain hasn't flourished at all since Brexit.
Absolutely.
Which I agree with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then trade has become a whole lot more difficult because of the barriers, not being a member of the EU, and those wouldn't have been in place or weren't in place when we were members of the EU. Any other reasons?
Absolutely. Security and safety.
Okay.
The European Union was created on the basis of an idea of various people, including Winston Churchill, not just him, but lots of others, to prevent another war in Europe by bringing people closer together. Because the best way to dispel hate, like racism and everything else, is to get people to meet each other. Oh, they're not so bad after all. Right? That's part of what the EU is about. They used economics to bring people closer together. That was the point. Now, today is 24th of February. What happened a year ago?
There was the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Exactly. Now, I've just been down at a service in Bolton Town Centre by the Ukrainians with Bolton Council, etc., where Putin was declared a fascist dictator, because that's what he is. And they drew direct comparison with the war memorial that they were facing and the people who died in that war trying to defeat fascism and what's going on now. It's exactly the same. This is why EU was created. This is thus a vital part of preventing future wars, trying to solve the one that's going on now, and provide a solution for the future that is neither America nor Russia, but something with a bit more stability, sense, democracy, and values, frankly, than either of those two.
Okay. Now, I want to be careful that we don't get into a conversation about the rights and wrongs of the Ukraine war, right? But I do get how it's important with regard, in terms of the impact on the EU and the influence that the EU has. So I want to keep looking at it from that perspective. Okay. So the EU was brought together in order to prevent war on the continent between these European nations, and they do have a history of friction between each other, right, going back many, many years, right? Then you're saying for economic reasons, in terms of trade has become much, much harder. And then also in terms of people mixing and getting to know each other and stuff like that. Okay. And relating and connecting. Okay.
And personal identity, obviously, but that's just personal.
That's just your one. Okay. That's right. Okay. Any other reasons? Anything else?
People's rights to travel, people's rights to live, love, work, etc., all over the European Union. We're now stuck on this little island. And guess what? We can't get the workers either.
Right.
1 million European citizens have left the UK since Brexit. 1 million. Yet the population of the UK has gone up.
Yeah, because there are more people coming in.
Yes. Why are there more people coming in? Because the world is more and more unstable.
Yep.
Why are they coming in on boats? Because the government have closed all the routes to come in. Why can we not return any through the route that they approached? Because we've left the Dublin Agreement. So there's no agreement on return. We dumped it. Part of Brexit.
Okay. But all
no
these...
way to return it.
Sure. But
we're creating loads and loads and loads of problems for ourselves for no reason except to help the Conservatives not pay tax by hiding the money on offshore accounts, in tax havens that we run. The UK has more tax havens than any other country in the world, in former colonies and all the rest of it. All right? That is why the rich wanted Brexit. This is why the 4 people that control the UK's press, or virtually all the press, are offshore. They don't pay tax on anything.
And just to spell it out for people, how, including myself, because I remember hearing about this at the time. And during the Brexit referendum, in the run-up to it, I was so digging into stuff and reading up and researching and listening to ideas from both sides. A lot of that stuff I've forgotten, so you have to forgive me, right? And some people don't know.
6 years ago, so I'm not surprised.
Yeah. So what is it? So tell me about what is it about the tax issue?
Well, the EU was bringing out rules to prevent tax evasion. Not avoidance, but evasion. Okay, avoidance is doing things within the rules. So they were tightening up the rules, so avoidance was no longer possible. Because actually what they're doing is moving their money into other countries so they don't pay tax, and then shuffling it in and out to pay for things. And some countries allow that, others don't.
Right.
Okay. Now, With the EU bringing that sort of stuff in, the Conservatives got very scared and decided that their donors, as in Russian oligarchs, Chinese oligarchs, and all the rest of it that own half of London, didn't want this to happen. And they were donors to the Tory party. So between self-interest and party finances, they decided the best thing to do was to leave the EU. Rees-Mogg moved all his money, all his cash and investments into Irish base, Southern Irish base. This is the guy that told us it was going to be wonderful. He's moved all his investments to Southern Ireland. So he didn't lose when the pound crashed.
Mhm.
These are the clowns you've got in charge. With Johnson, with Trussonomics and all the rest of it, this is all Brexit.
Okay, but it wasn't those that they didn't carry the vote. From what I can tell in Southeast,
Sure, no.
it was the hinterland, the English, the hinterland of London, the northern areas, the Welsh, those that hadn't benefited.
Yes,
From
the left
who aren't in
behind
the
were
catchment
conned.
area of the city of London.
Yeah,
They're the ones that
they didn't lead it, but they were conned. And specific Facebook's ads, remember Cambridge Analytica and all that stuff that came out in the Trump election and also in the Brexit vote. And the US had a report on it and found out that the Russians had been involved in the election, etc., and they've done things to try and prevent that in the future. The UK had a Russia report, which Johnson sat on for over a year, refusing to publish it. And it still has not been published in anything like full. It's massively redacted. And it covers all Putin's investments through Aaron Banks and various other people. As Carol Cadwallader brought out, ended up going through court on her own against this massive mega millionaire and won eventually. And the press won't publish it. All this stuff is going on. And they created a referendum in the UK on leaving the EU. Right. One, it's not defined what the hell it was. Two, it was advisory, because that's the only referendum that is actually allowed in the UK. It's an advisory referendum. And then Cameron, off his own bat, decided to tell the public, oh, whatever you decide, we'll implement, making the referendum binding, when that's illegal in the UK. So when we claimed that the referendum was full of lies, cheating, corruption, and everything else, the High Court threw our case out because they said, no, the referendum's not binding. Just because a politician stood up and say, I'm going to make it binding, doesn't make it binding in law. So all the lies and the targeted adverts with things like the 70 million Turks are coming over from Farage and all that sort of stuff, none of that was challengeable in court. If the referendum had been binding, it would have been annulled.
Okay.
That's how bad the situation is at the moment. So we're now run by corrupt liars who are thieving as much of the tax money as they possibly can, shoving it in their pockets and their mates' pockets, like the £37 billion spent on track and trace. If I remember correctly, Germany, which has a bigger population than the UK, I think they spent, was it 10 billion on a system that worked and ours didn't? And we spent £37 billion on it.
Okay. Okay, now I want to say, John, there's a lot that you've said that I don't agree with. But we've established that from the start.
Oh,
right?
sure.
Yeah, and what I appreciate is, is that you knew, because when I invited you to come on, I told you, look, and it was today, still willing to have this conversation. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely, yeah.
So are there any other, so what I want to do is give you an opportunity to present your argument, and then I've got some questions for you. So are there any other particular reasons?
That's the main points that come to mind right off the top of my head. As we said, it was an open conversation without any sort of pre-warning of questions and things like that. So yeah, go.
Okay. And then how would you go about reversing Brexit or for Britain to rejoin the EU? What's the process that your party's come up with, or would you address that near the time?
We haven't come up with a process. We've got a variety of different ways it's possible. We really don't care how it's done as a party. Everybody's got different views, etc. It's not a problem. As I said, we've got one banner, rejoin EU right now, please. Okay, that's it.
And do you propose a referendum to assess that?
No, we don't propose anything. We're saying there's a variety of different routes. It's for the people to decide, or whoever's in charge to decide, whichever their favourite is. Okay. There's one thing for certain, is that first, we need a real democracy here. Now, real democracy is where your vote actually counts, and counts every day. At the moment, we have a system called first past the post, which very few countries have, including Belarus. Not really a box we want to be in with, okay? The systems is basically a 5-year review of a feudal system. where the leader of the biggest gang of thugs gets all the power for 5 years.
Yep.
That's basically what you've got in each constituency. All these thugs sit together in the House of Commons, and the biggest gang of thugs gets to decide what's happened for 5 years, with no recourse, no change, no rights for anybody else. When you realise that it's always a minority that will get the government they voted for, always. It's extremely rare that any government ends up with more than 50% of the vote. So why are they a government? Why are they on their own? What we need is proportional representation, which means every vote counts, and it counts every bloody day.
Yeah, no, if I remember correctly, proportional representation happens with the London mayoral elections.
It does, yes. Yeah. And it happened with the EU elections because it was mandatory.
Yeah, with the EU elections.
And it does to a certain extent in Scotland, because the government decided to put a system in because they knew the SNP would romp home with first past the post. So they added a second layer of PR with a system that favours the people who didn't get many votes. So the Tories were still represented. Otherwise, they wouldn't be on it.
Yes.
Yes. It's so corrupt. It is unbelievable here.
Yes, well, I think that I would argue that's political systems everywhere, pretty much, right? The gangsters in charge.
Well, when you bring people in, you get corruption. But to have a system that's literally designed to keep the people's majority view out of power.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, listen, by the way, I agree with you, the metaphor thugs. I've often talked to my political videos. They're all gangsters. This group of gangsters versus that group of gangsters. And actually, I could, because I work as a children's social worker, I can even break it down to like playground gangs.
Oh, yeah.
World is the playground. And we've got this gang and this gang and this gang. Right. And then it's the little people that lose out that don't have a say. So one of the things that you stand for.
The very nice thing, Rich, about our party. We're not a gang. Every candidate gets to decide their own policies, as long as they do nothing racist or fascist, and they push basically rejoining the EU. On other matters, they're free to decide what it is they want to say.
So I get it. So I could join your party as someone who's not racist, who's opposed to fascism.
So long as you wanted to rejoin the EU and made that clear in public.
It wouldn't work for me as a Brexiteer to join the party.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as you change that bit, you never know. Things will come,
Which is
one
fair
day you won't be
enough,
able to buy any tomatoes and you'll really get upset about it.
Which is fair enough, because a socialist wouldn't go and join the Tory party, right?
Oh, they do. They do.
I suppose.
And the reverse. They walk across the house.
Oh, well, they do as the party members.
Yeah, they're godparents.
I don't want to get into
opposite and all the rest of it.
Okay, fair enough. Right now. So you will leave that. Now, is it that what you intend to do is kind of like what Farage accomplished with the UKIP? Because they didn't get any MPs, but they did sway the discourse.
We are trying to sway the discourse, yes. And one of the major things we have been trying to do, whether we carry on doing that is up to the individuals or not, is try to influence Labour members to influence their candidates, to influence their MPs, councillors and all the others into changing their minds on Brexit and start supporting having another vote or whatever system they want to do to get us closer to the EU and then back in.
Okay, so then you're using you're using all the resources available, right? All the peaceful...
Yeah, by-elections and local elections and everything, yeah.
Yeah, so to lobby at local level for people to lobby their MPs, their councillors, in order to shift them this way, hold them to account, hold their feet to the fire for what you're out to promote. I got it, right? And then with the first past the post, you want greater democracy and accountability within Westminster, which I would completely...
Because guess what? You can no longer have a one-party dictatorship anymore.
Yeah.
There has to be a balanced view. There has to be working together, which is exactly what the EU is. It's a group of people working together, not one individual deciding, Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer,
Okay. Can I just ask, do you have any sort of policy with regards to the euro, or do you just kind of leave it? It's just rejoin. Don't be a racist. Don't be a fascist. Rejoin the EU.
That's it.
That's it.
That's simple.
I got it. Okay. So there's no point asking you anything about.
How do we get there? How have we been trying to get there? We've been standing in by-elections and local elections and taking votes from the major parties. In Golders Green, our candidate in the latest local election down there was a by-election to replace a member that had to leave for whatever reason. I don't remember. It's too far away from me.
Mm-hmm.
We got third place.
Sorry, you got third place?
Yeah, we beat the Lib Dems and the Greens.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And are you getting votes from the Tories or from Labour?
Everywhere.
See, it's funny because if
We
I
have Conservatives, we have Labour, we have Lib Dems, we have Greens, we have animal rights people. We've got everything inside our party.
right, okay, and then you're in
Because
Northern England.
fine.
You're in Northern England, which was the red wall, all those red seats that voted Tory or whatever, right? What's the sort of response that you're getting, you'd say, locally in that part?
Very good. Very
Okay.
good. I've been involved in 2 by-elections up here, Chester and then Stretford and Urmston, where we got about 1% of the vote. And this time in Golders Green, amazingly, we got enough to get 3rd place. Great. It's all about raising the profile. And the more times we push these other parties backwards, or maybe potentially swing the vote, maybe do a little bit of damage to one candidate to the point where they start thinking, oh, shit, people are changing their minds here. Maybe we, Labour, etc., need to change our minds and start being a bit more positive about the EU.
Yes, which I think is the same strategy, or how UKIP was so effective.
Yeah, except the reason he got what he wanted is he made a deal with Johnson because he was taking all the old racists out of the Tory party and he needed them back to be able to win power at the election. So he made a deal with Farage just before the door closed when nominations were put through that UKIP would not stand. And thus, all the UKIP voters voted Tory because there was no other choice. You look on the other side of the spectrum and there were 4 or 5 parties standing. So guess what? Even though the majority of people voted for parties that didn't support Brexit, parties that wanted new referendums, etc., the minority won again.
Okay. And anything else you want to say about ReJoin EU and what you represent or anything? Okay. All right. So one of the things that I completely agree with you on is about greater accountability and holding, being able to hold our lawmakers, the principal lawmakers, which in the UK are the MPs, to account, and that they have to be answerable to the electorate. And I know Tony Blair got his comeuppance with regards to the Iraq War eventually.
Yes.
People, I stopped voting Labour after the invasion of Iraq. That's it. I'm not voting Labour after that, right? Otherwise, I'd always voted Labour. And then, and in the UK, we do get, it's every 5 years, we do get to say, it's better than nothing, I suppose, right? How would I vote out Joseph Borrell?
Who's Joseph Borrell?
He's the foreign minister for the EU. So he determines foreign policy for all of the EU, representing the EU citizenry.
Can you, as an individual, vote out Rishi Sunak?
No, I can't. But here's hold on.
He doesn't stand in your constituency.
He doesn't. But here's what you and I can do. Supposing we're both opposed to Rishi Sunak, we can participate in a campaign in his constituency in Richmond, Yorkshire, either physically there or online or whatever means, and we can lobby and influence the local electorate to vote out Rishi Sunak. So he does have to answer to the ballot, to his electorate.
He does, yes.
His electorate. Now, Joseph Borrell, as representing the EU, when does he have to answer to the voters?
As far as I understand, this guy is a commissioner, or an official of the commission.
He's a member of the commission,
right?
He's
the commission is the civil service of the European Union. You don't get to decide who's the head of the various departments for the civil service in the UK. You can't vote them out. No more than you can vote the House of Lords out, or the Queen, or the King now.
I absolutely agree with you on those.
That's the same situation.
Yep.
So the person you're targeting there is a civil servant.
Okay.
It's an appointee.
But he's different in as much as it's in the UK, the foreign ministers, he or she determines the foreign policy and the civil servants execute that. But within the commission, Joseph Borrell, the civil servants in Britain don't give speeches. Joseph Borrell gave a speech the other day about the Ukraine war and the EU's position on it.
Why is that? Because the EU its constitution sets out that there are 3 bodies. There is the Parliament that you vote for, or used to vote for. You had MEPs, etc. There is the Commission, which is the civil service. And there is the Council of Europe, which is the prime ministers, finance ministers, etc., from all the member states. They decide the policy, not the civil service. It's the prime ministers, foreign ministers, etc., of the various countries that tell the Commission what the line is, and the Commission apply that line.
Okay.
It's exactly the same as the civil service here. Remember during COVID, when the fat lard tub was stood there, and he had two people from the civil service answering questions, and then he overrode them.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that one of the civil servants got assaulted in one of the parks in London by two people and the police had to arrest them is because he was on the telly, because Johnson was getting him to take the hits instead of himself.
Sure, but
So
nevertheless,
it's exactly the same situation.
nevertheless, Johnson is answerable at the ballot box,
Yes,
right?
but that civil servant isn't, and that civil servant got attacked in the park because Johnson made him stand up with him and spout live on TV, but they're not supposed to do.
Sure, John. All sorts of things happen which shouldn't happen with politicians and civil servants in the EU, in the UK, that you and I are opposed to, right? My point here is about the structure, right?
Yeah.
So,
I agree. The structure's crap. It's absolutely crap. The way it is structured is crap. But it is actually more democratic than the UK setup.
Okay. So
because you've got all the politicians of all the various countries that decide, all the members of the European Parliament, all the national and regional parliaments all have to pass a piece of legislation before it becomes legislation. Once it is legislation, the Commission enforces it. That's how it works. When they want a piece of legislation, the ministers get together and they decide we want to go in that sort of area with these sort of things. Commission, go away, draft something, bring it back. And it ping-pongs between them. Once they've agreed and signed off on it, it then goes to the European Parliament to pass. And it ping-pongs back and forth. Then it goes to all the national parliaments, and in Belgium and Germany, I believe, it goes to the Länder or regions to pass. And everybody has to pass it before it becomes law.
Okay.
Far more democratic. Here you have one chamber where you have one party that decides the rules. That's it.
Sure. Listen, I agree with you about the deficit here, and I want more democracy, more accountability, more transparency, right?
You voted to get rid of it.
But here, the EU has recently, the EU Commission has recently passed a directive which will allow for insects for.
No, wrong. Sorry, the EU Commission does not pass a directive.
Well, there was a directive that's been issued.
Yes, and the directive, as up detailed, comes from the government ministers all together, with the Commission drafting, writing it, getting it passed, etc. Then it goes through the MEPs, it goes through all the national and regional parliaments.
Okay.
Then the rule changes.
All right. Supposing you and I are like, okay, we don't want this. We don't want this. How would we lobby to get it changed?
Ask you a question. How do you change Suella Braverman's mind?
Well, no. Please answer my question. How would you and I lobby this European-wide?
It's the same thing. It's just it's a different issue, but it's the same process. How do we get rid of a law that we don't agree with or stop a law happening?
We lobby our MPs. We vote them out. Like we did with Tony
So what you do, you lobby all the ministers and you lobby all the MEPs. Same thing.
Okay, no, but hold on. There are structural deficits here. See, the MEPs can't initiate legislation.
No, correct.
So then
the government ministers
can. Hold on, John. Right. So I can, and people in the UK did. I think Thatcher with the poll tax. I think, and I think the Falklands War worked in her favour.
Yes.
People voted her in because of that. I think Tony Blair with the Iraq War.
Yes.
But we can't vote out Ursula von der Leyen or Joseph Borrell. And no, because they're never answerable at the ballot box.
No, what you can do is influence your prime minister and get people in other countries to influence their prime minister to deselect her and take her out.
Right. So that's
how the process works.
In my opinion, that's a flaw because they're not directly accountable to any electorate.
They're a civil servant. Yeah.
Well, but I have to go through these layers. And those layers reduce the democratic accountability. That's not the case within Britain.
If you want to get rid of the head of the civil service, what do you have to do? Influence a load of politicians.
Sure.
It's exactly the same.
The primary lawmaking body in the UK is the House of Commons.
Yes.
The primary lawmaking body in the EU is not the Assembly, not the elected members, because they can't initiate legislation.
Correct. And it's not the Commission either.
Sorry?
It's not the Commission.
But the ministers aren't directly accountable at the ballot box.
Of course they are.
But why aren't the MEPs directly accountable? Why don't they get to...
Of course, I would agree. That's the way it needs to go.
So then
we need to get rid of the Prime Minister's meeting and the Foreign Secretary's meeting together and deciding in a closed room what the rules are going to be.
Right. So that's the other thing. The EU Council meetings aren't open to the public.
Correct.
right? So
This
there's
is
no
why
transparency.
UK politicians have been able to lie and lie and lie about
Right.
what the EU have done, because they're not actually being filmed in their actual discussions.
That's right. The public can't have access to those meetings, so it all happens behind closed doors.
Yes.
That's not transparent or accountable,
No, agreed.
right?
Absolutely agreed.
what's
And
the
I would
point?
say we need to change that situation. I would like a United States of Europe. I would like to dispense with all the national governments, all of them, and replace it with one government for the whole of the European Union.
Okay, but what's the process for reforming, given that the MEPs can't initiate that proposal because they can't initiate any legislation, and then those that are in power don't have to worry about being directly held to account by
Remember,
the voters?
the MEPs are in parties, in European parties. Not the Conservative Party, it's the European People's Party, for example, that they're part of, or were at a certain stage and then changed. They together can get a majority and block any legislation that comes through. They can stop the European Union working completely. They can not pass the budgets, and everything stops.
Okay, but they can't.
Like the Senate or the House of Congress can do in the US. They can literally stop a president completely from doing anything because he has no budget.
Sure, but they can't initiate legislation. They're not the primary.
They don't need to. They don't need to.
But okay, so John, you and I may not agree on this, right? But for me,
they should do, but they don't need to at the moment.
They should do, right? Because that was.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I heard. Because I told you I started off as a Remainer, right? For the reasons that you've outlined, like people loving each other, opposed to racism and all of that, right? And it was like I think it is mostly certainly the centre-left position currently, in my opinion, right?
Yeah.
And then I listened to this conversation between Galloway and Farage, and I thought, there's going to be fireworks.
Oh, good Lord.
There's going to be fireworks, right?
Idiots, did you? Oh, cracky monkeys, Dan.
No. But what they both raised was the issue of sovereignty. And one of them, they mentioned that Tony Benn and the Labour left. The Labour was opposed to the EU to the UK joining the EU in the referendum. Then I went out and I hunted out and I listened to what Tony Benn had to say. Now, I am a big fan of Tony Benn and agree with him on many, many things. And then he has these 5 questions. And he says, this is the issue with the EU, right? Here's questions. What power do you have? How did you get it? Who are you accountable to? How can I get rid of you? And there's one other question I can't remember. Right?
What power have you got? Where did you get it from? In whose interest you exercise it? To whom you're accountable? And how can we get rid of you? And if you can't get rid of the people who govern you, you don't live in a democratic system.
I thought, well, okay, if I apply that to the EU, they have a lot of power, but there isn't any mechanism. And it was designed this way, the way that it was set up. It wasn't by accident. Where they're directly accountable in any way whatsoever to the electorate. Now, I want a world where we're moving towards greater democracy.
Who designed it that way?
Governments.
The prime ministers.
Yeah.
The prime ministers designed it that way and are keeping it that way. So who's responsible for this mess? The prime ministers.
Sure, but
not the EU. It's the prime ministers.
Yes, they've set up a system.
Yes,
which is incredibly
corrupt. Politicians have set up a system that's totally corrupt. Yeah. Look at Scotland. Scotland hasn't voted Tory since the 50s.
Yeah,
and yet they've had majority Tory governments. Why? They can't change it.
Yep. Like, listen, I agree with you with proportional representation, but they've set it up. Even though with proportional representation, it's unreformable because there's no way for the demos to exert an influence directly on those that determine policy.
It simply takes the majority of the prime ministers to get together and agree this is the way we want to go,
but
and then convincing their parliaments to sign it off.
But they're not going to, because it would mean giving up their power. And why would they do that?
So what's the difference with a UK prime minister not giving up his power over Scotland?
Oh, listen, I completely agree with you, right? But
zero.
because Rishi Sunak, like any other MP, is answerable to the electorate directly,
holding all the power to himself.
Sure. But the point is, while the UK system is far from the sort of democratic system that I would like, I consider that the EU is even less democratic because there's even less direct accountability. It's obfuscated through layers.
No, there's a whole load of different democratic accountability.
You and I cannot lobby our MEPs for them to initiate legislation unless the Commission or the Council give their agreement.
You think the MEPs have no influence?
No.
They have massive influence.
I said to initiate legislation.
Yes. How do you initiate legislation? As an individual. You and I can initiate legislation by getting MPs to do so.
Yeah, and there's no equivalent like that in Parliament.
Of course there is.
In the EU Parliament.
Of course there is. Of course there is. You get your MPs to lobby your Prime Minister and get the MPs in the other European countries to lobby their Prime Ministers to change the rules.
Right, okay. But that diminishes the direct accountability.
To an extent, yes.
Like I said earlier, there are layers. Okay, so that's fine. Let's move on to something else, right? So here's something that I was that I didn't agree with in the run up to the Brexit referendum, which for me is an example of the sort of overarching influence of the EU. So Salvini got elected, and one of the explicit mandates was they were going to spend money on Italy's crumbling infrastructure.
Yes.
But that would have meant exceeding the EU's 3% spending target, right? Now, the Italians voted in Salvini on that explicit platform plus whatever else he was offering, right? So he wanted to implement that, but the EU said no. Now, but now hold on. So then what happens to the Italian voters that wanted that policy?
Right. What happens to Scotland that wants more money for its NHS? It's exactly the same thing.
Sorry, I don't understand.
The SNP gets elected to improve the NHS and spend more money on it, but the government cuts their budget by reducing the amount of money they give them back of the money they've contributed. It's exactly the same problem.
Yes, except what the SNP can lobby for is for another referendum at some point, and then also
in Italy, they can have a referendum on leaving the EU, like Scotland can have a referendum on leaving the UK. It's no different.
But hold on. But in the meantime, the Italian vote is worthless.
Yes, just like the British vote is worthless.
Sure, Italy is but that doesn't mean we should go from one unaccountable system into another unaccountable system.
No, I'm saying we reform the unaccountable systems.
But there's no structures for reforming it.
There was no structure for leaving the EU. And when the UK decided to leave the EU, they had to create a mechanism to allow it to happen.
Sure, but there isn't any direct structure for it. Now, there's another example for Italy. There's another example for Italy, right? Which is that Salvini wanted to set up Italian bonds. So create a local
Italian.
No, what was it? Oh no, this was a suggestion. Oh, this is what the Italian government wanted to do. They wanted to move their gold. They have over 2,000 tons of gold from imperial conquest. They wanted to move it from private banks into a government national bank, a government repository. And the EU said no. Well, wait a minute. It's the Italian gold.
Why?
It's the Italy's gold.
No. Shall I tell you why?
Tell me why.
Because Italy's in the euro.
Right, okay. So then what happens?
They're in a common currency. One country can't do something separate from the others when you're in a common currency.
Right, okay.
Texas can't do that in the US.
Okay.
When Brown sold all the gold that the UK had, do you think Cornwall or Scotland or Yorkshire could have stopped him? No.
Right. So then, see that. But I agree with you that, right? That's the reason why. But I don't agree with the loss of sovereignty.
There's no such thing as sovereignty. It's a lie.
Well, I don't agree with the
The sovereign individual is the person living on an island on their own.
Sure, we have to negotiate and deal with others, right? But
sovereignty is bullshit. It is a lie to people. The sovereign decides. That's what sovereignty is. The sovereign decides what the rules are. That's what that word literally means.
Okay, but greater centralization diminishes local democracy.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, fine.
I would change the system completely. If you remember,
there's no mechanism for changing the system. There's no mechanism that we can.
There is. It's political. You've got to do it slowly. You've got to convince politicians to change it. Create parties to get it done. Why not? We have to reform the EU Party and start going that way.
Well, now here's my assessment. This is an opinion. This is my opinion, right? Why it hasn't happened and why it won't happen is because because the European Union is so large and disparate with so many different regions, cultural, linguistic, religious traditions, right? It's unwieldy that what concerns somebody in Malta is very, very different to what might concern somebody in northern Germany.
Just remember this one. Gradually, as the EU gets more and more and more chapters, the defence chapters being worked on at the moment, to help them work together and reduce the costs of purchasing defence equipment, training people, providing forces for various crises, which small countries can't do. They can only do it with others, so it makes sense to communalise stuff and work together. The divisions would still be in the separate countries, but they're actually working with each other as opposed to against each other, without necessarily needing to involve the US and Canada as part of NATO, right? And counterbalance that. Now, when you look at the EU, yes, it has issues. Yes, it was created in the 50s with certain systems and reformed in the 80s with the Single European Act. But it's nowhere near where it needs to be. Size-wise, powers-wise, gradually as more and more chapters come in, they will have to reform it because they won't be able to do it the old way. The national parliaments will disappear. The national prime ministers will disappear. And slowly, you'll elect it directly to the EU's government. It will have to happen because they won't be able to do it. Look at ancient Rome. Why did ancient Rome collapse? Because it got too big and it was too hard to get messages to the extremes, to get forces moved and taxes collected and all the rest of it. It was too difficult. And gradually, as they got attacked in one place, it was attacked in several other places at once, and they couldn't coordinate the forces to keep the thing together. And gradually it shrank down to the point where it was just the city of Rome, and then it got invaded and taken over, and that was the end of that.
Okay.
The Roman Empire split as well. into at least two halves. Sometimes it was four halves.
Okay,
four sections.
Okay. Now, in my opinion, the EU will fracture over time, right? And you and I can
look
disagree.
At COVID, look at COVID, look at Brexit, and look at the Ukraine war. The EU has never been stronger.
Sure. Now, here's why I'll say it'll fracture. One is it's broke. It's completely broke, and it's not. Hear me out, John. Right, and then perhaps you can address this where I've got something wrong. Right. So the EU between 2008, 2014, 2022, its finances were in such a terrible state that it had negative interest rates and zero interest rates. That's upside down money. That's like I've got £100. I put it in the bank. Hold on.
What do you think's happening in the US?
Oh,
it's the same thing. The US has borrowed so much money. It owes more to the Chinese than the US is worth.
Absolutely. The US, the UK, they're all incredible debt. However, what they didn't have, the UK had it for a short while, is negative and interest rates and zero interest rates. What that means is the EU doesn't have the money to make repayments on its debt. And I can't see where the EU is going to be able to generate the revenue to make the money.
The UK does? You think the UK does?
I think the UK has resources.
We just repaid some of the debt from the Second World War.
Sure.
By issuing new debt.
Sure. But that the situation isn't great here doesn't mean that we should then go into this other situation where it's not great, where it's even worse because they have
because the EU saves you masses of money. It costs the UK 8 times less to have something organised by the EU. 8 times less. Okay, because you're sharing the cost.
But where is the EU, as far as I can tell, doesn't have any real reliable way of generating any revenue.
Correct, because it's not allowed to raise its own taxation. It's the individual countries that contribute the money, and of course they want to hold it to themselves, so they can use it to buy votes.
But even then, Europe as a landmass, apart from Norway, Britain, and Italy, has very little in the way of raw materials or resources that it can access.
And
that's where money comes from. That's how you create wealth.
Not anymore.
No. The first order is resource extraction.
Sure, that's Africa.
Second order is manufacturing. Third order, the service industries, right? The manufacturing that Europe has is dependent on first order. We don't have any first order apart from Italy, Netherlands a little bit, Britain, and Norway, which isn't a member of the European Union. So where are they?
Germany has the manufacturing. Germany has the manufacturing, or most of it, yes, because they have policies tending in that direction.
Germany does have manufacturing, but without access to cheap energy, which it doesn't have anymore, without access to cheap raw materials, which it doesn't have anymore, the manufacturing is not going to be affordable. They're not going to be able to compete with the rest of the world.
They've been doing all right for 60 years, mate.
Yeah, they were doing all right based upon Russian energy and the Ukraine war.
No, the Russian energy is only a very recent thing. Go back 10, 15 years, it wasn't Russian energy.
Sure. Okay, but they don't have the energy.
Oil and gas, it's nothing. You can get that from anywhere. It's just a question that the Chinese have started using far more oil and gas, so there's a lot less of it available.
Right, so it's a whole lot more expensive. So then the issue is...
Now you look, China and India are buying Russians' oil and gas, and we're buying it off the people that used to supply China and India.
And we're buying it off India at a markup as well.
It's just swap around.
But they don't have access to the cheap energy. We don't have access to the cheap...
We do now. Look at the price of gas. It's just tumbled massively on international markets. The rejigging has happened. It's over. Putin has no pull on it anymore. It's over.
All right. Then I want to ask you, but I don't agree with you, but okay. But I want to ask you about the euro, right? There are 34 countries that are dependent on the euro in some way or other.
That use it, yes. They've adopted it as their currency, yes.
Or dependent upon it in some way or other, right? Now, 14...
In fact, the whole world's dependent on the euro. China holds half its reserves in euro now, not in dollars.
Yes.
It's sold half its dollars away.
Yes, and it has who knows how many tons of gold, right? But,
correct. Yes.
But there are 34 countries that directly depend upon the euro, right? 14 of them are African nations.
Yes.
Now, for me, that is that's definitely a relic of imperialism. Where
it's a question of countries deciding where their bread's buttered. Is it better to run their own, like the franc CFA, the CFA franc in West Africa, which is an absolute fucking shambles, right? It was set up for the ex-French colonies to have some sort of common currency. It doesn't work. It's a mess, right? Now, there's an awful lot more countries dependent on the dollar. They peg their currency to the dollar. It's only the same. Peg to the euro, peg to the dollar, peg to the renminbi, peg to whatever. It doesn't matter.
Okay,
because they're small compared to a very large economy, so they don't have any effect. They can run as much deficit as they like. It makes no difference because they don't use the lateral currency. They use the dollar pegged.
Okay, but
they don't get to do devaluations and revaluations to rebalance their economy. That's the counterpart to it. Yet they have a stable currency that they can use.
Sure, but they don't have. They have to earn in that stable currency. They have to repay that debt in the currency.
Yes, correct.
The currency provides.
Yet, if they were using whatever local currency they used to have, that was utterly worthless because no one trusted it because they kept playing around with its value.
Okay, but it does smack of colonialism, where you
Of course it does.
where you
Of course it
have
does.
you have the rich Northern European.
It's worse than that. It smacks of wanting to be colonized.
Okay, but I think that's shifting because more and more African nations are throwing the French out, right?
Yes.
Which is a good thing.
But
Now,
remember, I don't know how much you've worked in the third world. I have.
Mhm.
In places like Madagascar, etc., Senegal, Tunisia, Morocco, I've been all over, right? There is a sort of badge of superiority amongst the locals of speaking the colonial tongue, getting educated in the old colonial masters' universities.
I come
all that stuff.
from an
You're well
African
aware.
class background in Pakistan. I'm familiar.
Yes,
with
you know
that, right?
exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It's part of that. The people who have managed to get the money in the country by fair means or foul want to retain it. So what do? They invest it abroad. How do they protect their investments and their incomes and all the rest of it? They make the country follow the currency of the ex-colonial power. That's it.
Okay.
People are selfish, mate. People are selfish.
Yeah.
It's a basic thing about humans.
Yes,
That's
I
why
agree with you
communism
on that.
never worked.
But then what we have there, and I think throughout the EU's political structure, is structures that reduce accountability, transparency, that don't allow people to hold their lawmakers to account. Now, so that's not something that I don't agree with. And from my perspective, in the run-up to the Brexit referendum, what it seems to me is that the Northern European nations have done very, very well out of the European Union because they've been able, Germany in particular, they've been able to extract wealth from the Southern European nations.
The Southern European nations have massively benefited from aid.
But I don't see how Greece has benefited. They're much worse off now. If Greece went back,
Greece is better off now than they were in 2019. Way better off.
But if Greece went back to the drachma, they would take a hit. They could then invest in their agriculture, in their tourism. Their money would be there.
Do you remember when Greece joined the euro?
Yes, Goldman Sachs.
Greek government, the Greek leaders, Greek business, etc., pushed for the drachma to be valued as high as possible and pulled all the levers, stunts, lies, etc., that they could to increase the drachma's value. So when it converted to euro, they were richer.
Yes.
And what did that do? It drove up the cost of everything in Greece. And they could no longer produce anything because the cost of everything was so high, it was overvalued.
Absolutely. Thank you. I agree with you on that.
But like the Olympics.
Okay.
What about razzmatazz?
There is this whole element within the EU structure, within...
No, that's not the EU. That's worldwide.
Hold on, please, John. Where and includes national governments as well, right? Which are in it for themselves, extracting wealth for themselves, right?
Yes.
And the EU, I would say it's much, much worse because of the lack of accountability, the lack of transparency. You can't hold the lawmakers to account. We can't witness the discussions that the council have. We can't hold them to account in a way that national politicians are held to account in the ballot box.
Correct,
Despite this veneer, I would assert.
So it's not the EU that's the problem.
But it's the way that it's set up. But it's the way that it's set up. And
it's in the EU, but it's not the EU.
But it's set up that way, deliberately.
Correct.
Well, why would I
Westminster set up as a corrupt gang of criminals?
Yes, but I don't want to move from this corrupt gang of criminals to a less democratic gang of criminals, a larger gang of criminals.
They're not less democratic. That's where you're wrong. They're democratic in a different way.
Oh.
You've got far more accountability of new rules. You take a new law going through Parliament, goes through the House of Commons, goes through the House of Lords and a few committees, bing bang backwards and forwards. The House of Lords doesn't really get to decide anything if it's part of a party's manifesto. If it's outside, they can try and block it. But when it's in a party manifesto, they don't block it because otherwise they'd get closed. Right? That's the very basic thing of it. So if Sunak came out and said everyone who's gay gets put up against the wall and shot, he could do it. It would pass in the House of Commons as it is now, and he would start shooting them.
Well, I think we have certain...
There's nothing stopping him. There is no backstop. In most countries, you have a president or monarch and a prime minister, and they counterbalance each other. So they keep control of each other, and they can sack each other using the right mechanisms. The UK isn't like that. When you had Madman Johnson in charge, there was no stopping him. He committed crimes, he committed treason, and he couldn't be stopped.
We did have the mass murderer Tony Blair, and he was booted out at the ballot. Yes. Now we've already covered this, right? I want to go on to something else.
No, listen. What about when Johnson and Rees-Mogg went to the Queen and lied to her face to prorogue Parliament so they could get their Brexit through?
Oh, John, listen, politicians.
Crime. That was treason.
Politicians of all hues in all countries lie.
But he committed a crime and he couldn't be removed.
They all do that, right? They all do that. But
now, Partygate. What's going on with Partygate at the moment? The UK government, the taxpayer, is paying Johnson's legal fees to defend himself from the crimes that he committed, breaking the laws that he'd put in place.
Okay, but John, there are examples. There are examples within the EU of corruption. Say, for example,
Yeah, of course there is.
the Ursula von der Leyen losing all the text messages in terms of the agreements with Pfizer and all the agreements made there.
Nothing new. Politicians have been doing that from day dot.
Here's something. I remember when TPP, or whatever it was called for the EU, was going through, right? I remember watching this Irish MEP, I forget his name, a video of him. He could go and read the document. He wasn't allowed to have a copy of it. He wasn't allowed to take notes. He had to leave his camera outside. This is an elected member of the parliament.
It's the same in the UK.
No,
they can go and read the legislation for certain bills, but they're not allowed to have a copy.
Okay, but they can take notes. They do get copies. They do
get copies of some legislation, not others. Some things that government do, they're not allowed to take away. They're in the House of Commons library. They can go and read it there.
Yeah, sure. But where it gets debated and discussed and voted on is open. With the TPP, that was all happening behind closed doors.
Correct. Right. But remember that it hadn't got to the stage where the European Parliament and the national parliaments and the regional parliaments voted on it. It would have got to that stage, but it never did. It's like something being decided in cabinet. That's where TTP was. It was in cabinet.
Okay. All right. Here's something else then. I want to move on, right? Because you and I, it's not sufficiently democratic for me. You recognize that it isn't democratic, and you.
I agree. Yes, I would change the structures completely.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. We've covered that ground. Here's something else, right? Which
you can't change it from outside, mate. You can only change it from inside.
Yes. Or you can say, okay, I'm not going to join this corrupt gang of thugs. I'll stay with this lesser corrupt gang of thugs. Now, hold on, John. We're on something else, right? Which is to do with interest rate differential between the Federal Reserve, the UK, and also Europe. And I say the UK because the UK is going to suffer the same, right?
Yeah. We're a little boat in a high sea.
Capital is being drained from the EU, right? The euro-dollar market is being drained because capital is going to where interest rates are higher.
Yes, interest rates and a whole variety of other things, yes.
Sure, but many large funds, and it just makes sense. You've got several $1 billion. You're going to go and put it where you're going to get a better return, right?
Yeah.
Well, now that's going to weaken the euro and it's going to weaken the pound.
It's not. It's not. I'll explain why.
Right.
What is the world's biggest market? The Eurozone. Massively bigger economy than everybody else. Massively bigger than China, massively bigger than the US. The reason you don't see it is when they publish GDP figures and all that sort of stuff, they only ever publish it at country level. They never publish the EU's GDP. It's huge.
Okay, all right, but hear me out, right? Because
remember, Germany, UK, France are in the top tiers, right? Within the top 10. Add those three together, guess what? It doesn't half drag it up, then you add all the other countries on. Simple maths.
But here's what has happened since the Federal Reserve started raising interest rates, which was about a year ago, that the pound and the euro have dropped against the dollar. Yes. Oil and gas and payments are made in dollars. Imports, euro and the pound will continue to get weaker in terms of import because imports have to be paid for in dollars.
Yeah, but the thing is, the US can't sustain these high interest rates. They can't pay the bills. They can't pay the Chinese back. There's loads of discussion going on in the US about that now.
Sure. And I think from the stuff I've been looking at everything and listening to Jay Powell, I think they're going to carry on raising interest rates because they're out. LIBOR is no longer going to be setting the interest rates as of
until the Chinese call the debt in.
It's
going to go plump.
Sure, it's going to, and the euro and the pound will suffer as well. But SOFR, which is going to set the interest rates domestically, because from what I can tell, is what the Federal Reserve is want to have sovereignty and control over the dollar, and not have the Europeans and the British through LIBOR determine the price of the dollar. And
to me,
what that means
I'm sometimes a bit simplistic, Richard. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sometimes a bit simplistic, Richard. You can go into the ins and outs of all of this. That's great. The important thing when you're at sea is to be in a bigger boat. Because guess what? The bigger boats are less affected by the big waves. All right? The bigger the boat, the less effect a wave has on it. It doesn't tip as much. It doesn't pitch as much. The Eurozone is such a huge economy, as is China, as is the US, that it takes an awful lot of capital movement to affect their exchange rate. A piffling little country like us, or Afghanistan, or Brunei, or wherever else, floats massively for a small range of investments worldwide. China could bankrupt the UK in 5 minutes by recommending everybody sells the pound. Boom, gone, through the floor. Can't do it with the US and the EU. They can't. It's too big. They can't do it.
Okay. Now,
true.
Finish up. We're going to finish up, right? I think that the world, the point I haven't made, I think the world is moving towards greater decentralization, which I think ultimately is more democratic. But we don't know. I'm speculating here, right?
No, agreed. Yeah. In some ways, yes. In other ways, no.
Yeah, which is something that I would want. Is there anything you want to say that we haven't covered or whatever? To let people.
Yes, it is always better to team up, to work cooperatively, than it is in your own little corner.
Right.
Always.
Okay. Fine. I will say
And that's my final argument.
As long as you don't use your own agency.
Together, not in your little corner facing the wall.
Yes, but without compromising your own agency, I would add, right? John, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I have the links
Pleasure.
to ReJoin EU below. Right? If anybody's interested, please go check them out. Really, really appreciate you having this conversation with me. Thank you so much. And everybody's watching, if you have any comments or questions, please let me know. Please share this video all over the place. And between now and when I see you next, please keep filling your pockets with freedom and democracy and accountability, whatever. All right.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
All right.